The ether. A fertile plain of existence, in which a master cultivator navigates an ocean of stars. With him, his apprentice, a young mage who will soon discover all is not as it seems, as he unveils the tales of the verse.
Two figures stand in a magnificent garden, which lies at the center of all creation. One of them wears a hooded cloak. Peering into his face gives one the impression of viewing the universe itself. Despite his grandiose presence, his voice is like a gentle river moving through a mountain.
How have you been settling in, Horus?
Pulled away from his thoughts, Horus took notice of his master's voice. I've been admiring your statue. I don't believe I've seen anything quite like it. His master considered the statue. The craftsmanship was so fine that it made this stone figure appear as though it were alive.
I know the wounds in your heart are still fresh, and that this visage reminds you of her. But I believe the road before you will magnify your perspective.
Horus's response was tainted with doubt. How can I succeed here? When there, I sacrificed everything and gained nothing. Even as a mage, I feel limited in what I'm capable of.
Your skills and powers will improve in time. But what you call failure, I've come to know as growth.
Horus was doubtful of this. But everything grows, even weeds, and disease, and maggots that decay. How is this any different? The creator chuckled.
Indeed they do. But just because you don't find value within them, doesn't deny them of their purpose.
So, you brought me here to clean up the filth that others leave behind, just like them? I suppose that makes sense, considering the mess I've already made. Horus glanced back at the statue and defeatingly returned to his seat on the bench. A knowing smile adorned the corner of his master's mouth as he bent to pick a rose from the nearby bed of flowers.
Like all things, we come from nothing. And yes, sometimes even from filth. However, like this rose, we have a choice to burst to the surface and grow beyond from that which we've come. And at the end of our season, we finally bloom.
The creator leaned down and planted the flower in the soil near Horus's feet. Immediately, the rose began to root itself in the soil and became yet another bush in the garden. Success. But what success? Last time I supposedly succeeded, I ended up with nothing but failure. The creator grinned.
And that failure is what brings you to me.
The master quietly took a seat next to Horus, resting his hand on his shoulder.
The more you learn to trust me, the more you'll come to realize you're already beginning to succeed. I believe it's time for your first task.
Submitting to his words of wisdom, Horus replied. Okay. What will you have me do? Sometime later, Horus found himself in a cold grove of evergreens with a thick blanket of snow, smothering every corner of the forest. Horus felt the damp, dry air buffet him as he searched for the one his master sent him to meet, ever wondering what world he found himself in. Oh, this is great. Of all the worlds my master could send me, he chooses this inviting parcel of paradise, he sarcastically said to himself. Coming from a world of temperate weather and warmth, the snow was always something Horus had prided himself in avoiding. As he walked, Horus recalled the words of his master. Oh, okay, what did he say? He said, "Find an old friend of mine. Watch and observe. I think you'll find your time with him quite illuminating. Illuminating. I definitely hope it's illuminating. The only thing that could be found wandering around out here is death." It was just then that Horus realized another set of footsteps trailed at his side. And though chills currently ran up and down his body from the cold, a new, unfamiliar chill ran up his spine. Horus turned towards the presence that he felt, realizing that there was someone else with him in these woods. Horus immediately assumed the mage's defensive posture, drawing back his right arm past his cheek, as if drawing an arrow in a bow. His left arm extended towards his adversary. A sapphire ball of energy began to form in the palm of his hand, as a field of light wrapped around his left forearm and hand, like vines growing on a wall. He was ready to strike. "It didn't go well for the last stranger who surprised me," Horus said in his most menacing tone. Though he saw no person before him, he could feel an ominous presence. "Reveal yourself!" he proclaimed. Like an apparition, blending with the snow, a figure stepped forth, wrapped in a pale cloth which extended from head to toe. A hood veiled his head, and there was a void where a face should be. Though the stranger was unimpressive to look at, Horus felt the need to maintain his defensive stance. Undaunted by Horus's demeanor, the hooded figure curiously tilted his head at this newcomer. There was a long pause as the pale figure stood, looking towards Horus as he stared at him, as if waiting for a response. Yet Horus, standing his ground, did not yield against this ghostly apparition. Seeming almost indifferent, the cloaked figure turned slowly away, moving towards the trees. With a fixed gaze, Horus eased a little, but continued to stare at the figure with narrowed-eyed scrutiny. It was then that the pale figure turned back towards Horus, and with a hand like ethereal glass, he gestured for Horus to follow. After again having moved away from Horus, a single word broke the silence.
"Come,"
he said. Hesitantly, Horus dropped his defenses and followed close behind. No words were spoken for a time, and just when Horus began to wonder where he might be leading him, they came upon a small clearing. "I don't understand," Horus said abruptly. "What is it that—" But before Horus could finish his sentence, the stranger made a gesture, placing a single finger over the place on his face where his lips would be. Horus stopped mid-sentence, understanding the gesture. With some embarrassment, he watched as the stranger pointed to an opening between two trees.
"Look,"
the stranger said, with a voice both mild and penetrating. Looking over, Horus could see a misshapen figure wandering out into the grove. It was a gruesome figure, battered and forlorn, trailing blood behind it. It had the appearance of a wolf or hound, but longer and larger than any Horus had encountered. And unlike any beast he had met, this one appeared the most tragic. Horus couldn't help but pity the creature as it staggered towards them, seemingly unaware of their presence. As the beast came closer, Horus took notice that there were gashes to his side and snout. His hind leg was mangled and dragging. He bled from every pore as if he had been bathed in blood, leaving a trail as he limped along. But despite it all, Horus was surprised at the creature's acceptant expression. There was an uncanny peace about the beast that didn't reflect his horrific condition. "Should we help him?" Horus asked quietly.
When it's time, we will.
The stranger continued to watch the beast as it slowed its pace. Horus observed that the creature was breathing heavier and heavier with every step. Any moment could be his last. Yet as he came close to them, he lay his body upon the snow, coughing out another splash of blood. Watching closely, Horus began to feel the uncomfortability of the situation. Perhaps this is why I was sent here, he thought to himself. I could be the difference in this situation. I know of magic that could heal him in an instant. If only I could get near him. Feeling the need to interject, Horus spoke quietly. He shouldn't needlessly suffer. I could ease his pain. Or even perhaps I could heal him of his wounds. The stranger said nothing, but stood up slowly and approached the poor creature. He focused all the attention on the dying beast, kneeling beside him. Gesturing for Horus to join him at the creature's side, Horus timidly approached, wary of what could happen next.
Your hand. Place it here.
The stranger instructed. Horus gently placed his hand on the side of the creature's chest, feeling the beat of the beast's heart as it weakly rose and fell. As the stranger placed his hand on top of Horus's, an overwhelming flood of pain and emotion overtook him, and he felt an immediate desire to pull away. He could feel every cut, drop of blood, wound, ache, and the very defeat that had led to this moment. It was overwhelming, and almost more than he could bear. The stranger, anticipating his reaction, firmly but gently held his hand in place. In spite of Horus's reaction, the stranger continued to stare intently into the creature's eyes. It was then that he began to speak to the beast.
Dagon,
He said softly. Hearing his name spoken, the creature weakly opened his eyes, and it appeared to Horus that the beast looked upon the hooded stranger for the first time. Dagon's eyes fluttered and rolled back in his head.
I am here, gatekeeper.
He said weakly.
I've been waiting for you, old friend.
As Dagon said this, Horus could feel a surge of both fear and excitement. Horus immediately began to wonder who this hooded stranger was, and what was the meaning of all he had seen since he had arrived. It's as if they know each other, Horus continued to think. Yet neither the beast nor the stranger have interacted until this moment. Why did he not allow me to help his friend? Why has he not answered any of my questions? The thoughts shrouded Horus's mind as he continued to observe this moment. It was then that the feelings of pain and doubt that Horus could feel within Dagon began to swirl and stir.
I am afraid, Gatekeeper.
Dagon whimpered.
I may not be ready to make the journey. You are more ready than you know.
The stranger replied.
Come, follow me.
His voice seemed to silence the wind, and Dagon's heart began to settle. It was then that in place of all the fear and pain, an overwhelming peace began to rest upon his heart and mind. Horus's suspicions of who the stranger might be began to take hold of his thoughts. Gatekeeper, old friend? He's as if he were a ghost, Horus concluded. And yet, he speaks of a journey to help him on, while simultaneously allowing him to bleed and suffer. If this is the case, could he be the one that all creatures fear? Could this be the one who took her away from me? As Horus contemplated this, the mighty beast exhaled his last breath. For a moment, all was silent. The stranger let loose Horus's hand, and Horus refrained from speaking. Ceremoniously, the stranger stood slowly, lifting Dagon from where he lay. For a moment, Horus believed he was witnessing the creature's resurrection, because he appeared to be in his prime, youthful, strong, and unblemished. However, as Horus stood also, he could clearly see Dagon's lifeless body still lying in the snow. Quickly looking up, Horus turned to them with concern, but as he did, his worry melted away. For in front of him, he saw a sweet sight. Dagon joyfully moving about, greeting the pale figure as a beast greets its beloved master. He couldn't believe what he saw, but as he stood in amazement, he finally realized what he beheld.
Come, let us walk.
The stranger admonished Dagon and Horus. Before Horus realized that any time had passed, they came into a clearing that had seemed untouched by winter. It was a meadow ordered by flowers and all the lush greenery of spring. At the far end stood a stone gateway, glowing and inviting. It seemed to beckon whomever looked upon it. Horus, feeling some desire to move towards it, attempted to take a step, but before he could, the stranger stopped him.
That time has not yet come.
The stranger had rested his hand upon Horus and gestured for him to keep watching. In a cheerful sprint, Dagon trotted towards the gateway and paused briefly to look back. As Horus gazed into Dagon's eyes, he felt a tear begin to fall. He had never seen such joy. And with that, Dagon sprinted past the gateway and out of sight. It was then that Horus finally turned to the stranger. "You're him," Horus said with wonder. "The one that all living things fear. You're Death."
Some say
Death remarked.
I am known by many names, and I am known by all. So it has been, and so it shall forever be.
Horus turned towards Death, and in a solemn voice asked, "But why her? Why did you take her from me?" Death fully focused his attention towards Horus, as if it were the first time that he truly addressed him.
All must pass through the gate.
He said,
Like Dagon, she too was ready. Though you were not.
At that moment, all of Horus's questions seemed to lose their significance. Another tear fell. His heart calming, he asked a final question. "Will I see her again? And if I do, will she remember me?" Stepping closer to Horus, Death replied,
The only things that really matter in this great expanse are the things that happen in here.
Death pointed an enigmatic finger at Horus's heart. Horus pondered on these words, and as he did, a light seemed to fill every corner of his vision.
We will meet again, Horus Pen, in time.
A moment later, all would fade from Horus's view, quickly finding himself again in the great hall with his master.
I take it your journey was satisfactory?
Horus, in minor surprise, turned to his master. "So, your old friend was a Death," Horus remarked.
You shall probably meet many more of my old friends, and even those who claim to be my enemy. But you may find them different from what you presupposed, for the judgments we make of others are formed from our very limited perspective. Was your time insightful?
The master asked. In a reverent reply, Horus said, "Yes, indeed it was."
Good. Good.
The master pleasantly smiled and gestured for them to walk.
Would you say your perspective has changed?
Horus pondered the question for a moment. "Undoubtedly,"
Excellent.
the master voiced with an encouraging tone.
Then this next task, I think you'll like.